We're very happy and honored to have two distinguished guests from the New York University School of Medicine within the Venezuelan Institute for Scientific Research, and they'll be talking about the ancestral human microbiome. And it's fascinating when you look at the amount of bacteria that live in and on us. What I understand is there's actually more bacterial cells than human cells. So we are literally connected to the microbiome in very meaningful ways, and certainly changes in food can have a change in the microbiome. So we'll have two presenters. The first presenter will be Gloria Dominguez-Bello, and the second presenter is Hortensia Caballero Arias, again from New York University. And I believe Maria is the first presenter, so let's please join me in welcoming her. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be here because I've been dreaming about expanding our studies from South America up north and integrate other Native American peoples in studying nutritionally relevant problems, including the microbiome. I'd like to start showing the temporal trend of diseases in developed countries. So since the 1950s, diseases that are infectious by nature have been declining, and that's great. That's one of the successes of medicine. But on the other hand, and you can see in the right-hand side, the incidence of immune disorders have been increasing steadily, and that includes asthma, multiple sclerosis, inflammatory diseases of the colon, type 1 diabetes, obesity, and type 2 diabetes as a consequence. So this is the map of the United States from 1990 to 2008. And you can see that in 1990, no state of the U.S. had more than 10 to 14% obesity. In 2008, no state of the United States has less than 20 to 24% obesity. And this is a global trend, so this is a global trend in time as we have enjoyed our post-industrial lifestyle. But we observe this also across geographies where these changes in lifestyle occurs. We did a study in the Amazon basin in peoples with different lifestyles, from the Achuar peoples that live in the border between Peru and Ecuador, in huts and in a jungle community. Going east in the river, you have more rural settlements, small, then Iquitos, which is a big town, and Manaus, which is a modern city. And we studied a lot of things, including environmental health changes, house microbes, environmental exposure, microbiome of the people, and changes in architecture and urban settings. With the BMI data, I'm showing it here what we found, and we have so these are two CETA scores for body mass index. One is the WHO one that everybody knows. There is another one proposed by Frisancho, which takes into account the fact that women have more fat, and the breasts are mostly fat, and that shouldn't count against the BMI. But by both criteria, yeah, it's true, right? By both criteria, when you look at the town in the jungle, Checherta, the whole all the dots and the cross that accounts for the median and standard error falls under the normal quadrant. When you look at the other end of urbanization, Iquitos and Manaus, they all fall in the overweight. When we see the box plots of the median and the dispersion, what we find is that, well, these are healthy people, okay? So Amazonian people have plenty of food. They are hunter-gatherers, do some crops, and they have an ideal body mass index with some dispersion that never ranges below the the cutoff for malnourishment. But what happens right in the first stage of urbanization is an expansion of the variation. And that expansion gets worse in the urban poor, going from cohabiting extremely malnourished with obese. And that is called nutritional transition. So we also observe that we narrow the span. Instead of taking a modern city to the jungle, we narrow it to the surroundings of a big town, capital of the Amazonas state in Venezuela, where we have peoples living in the jungle, like these Majecoto Yanomamis in green, and Platanillal and Coromoto are Guahibo Amerindians with increasing degree of urbanization. This graph represents the bioimpedance results of resistance and reactants. And basically, the ellipsis shows percentiles, but what is important is where the dots fall. The quadrants can be divided in athletic, lean, obese, or malnourished, undernourished. And you can see the movement of the colors from green to red towards the obese. So this is one cross-sectional study across different degrees of urbanization. So the consequences of urban practices really impact us in many ways. Not only the places where we live, our surroundings, the characteristics of what surrounds our house, but our house themselves, the changes in architecture, not only urban setting, diet, mode of birth, and medicine, which is the first influence on native traditional peoples. The very first one is medicine, for good reason, because we can help them control diseases that have cure or can be avoided. But medicine has also brought important stressors to the microbiome. And why are microbes important? We have learned from the farms that antibiotics lead to increased fat deposition. This is an experiment in mice from the group of Marty Blazer. They fed the same diet, no change in diet, and they fed antibiotics for life or not in the water. And antibiotics increase the fat content. And that's not news. For 50 years in this country, antibiotics are still used for growth promotion. That's going to be banned. Europe banned it 25 years ago. But we know that. So it's beyond diet. And antibiotics, of course, kill bacteria. So it happens that not only, so we have, our cells have to decide how to differentiate into bone, muscle, or fat. These are stem cells. And diet affects that decision as much as microbes do, because immune signals are very important for these metabolic ways. And microbes have been there much before anybody else. The Earth is 4.8 billion years old, and 3.8 billion years ago, bacteria arose as the first form of life. And anyone who evolved later who had to deal with bacteria, there were fusions, there were associations, and we have only been here 0.2 million years ago, 200,000 years. And we are not an exception. Our body offers habitat to communities that are only human, site-specific human bacteria that are different in chimps or in bonobos or in dogs or in cats that co-evolve throughout the whole evolutionary history. And this is so site-specific that I can tell you the body site just by looking at the composition of microbes in a swab. I could tell you if it's skin, mouth, vagina, feces, ear, nose, lips. And where do they live? They don't live everywhere. there are forbidden territories, and that's the reason why we do have an immune system. They cover us on our epithelia, and that includes the skin or mucosa, everywhere in our outside invaginations and the digestive tube, which strictly speaking is not inside us. It's kind of an exterior that traverses us, right? It's a hole that traverses us. It's covered by epithelium, but it's not. So forbidden territories are inside the epithelial barriers. So the microbiome is really the interface between the exterior and our human cells. And this is a very important concept because any interaction with the environment, including diet, has to cross that interface, which is microbial, and not only bacterial. There are fungi and viruses and microbial viruses as well. So we are humans, and like any other mammal, we experience our first exposure to massive live bacteria in the birth canal during labor and birth. And we call that vaginal seeding because we think it's the first time we see live bacteria. And that bacteria that populates the mother's birth canal is highly relevant to milk. So mammals make sure, that nature has made sure that babies are born already inoculated with bacteria that will be selected for by maternal milk. And then traditionally, we slept with our babies, we hold our babies skin to skin until they were developed enough to be able to have enough sensorial and locomotion to reach for stimuli and grab everything. Humans have a very intense interaction with the environment after they are 6 months old. If you let them, they would lick everything they find. And we, in our modern urban society, we impact every single step of this process. We do C-sections for necessity and also, in many cases, out of other reasons that are not medically indicated. Then those babies are more likely to have formula supplementation. Many of them will only have formula. Then we dress with clothing that separates us even when we hold the babies, but we don't hold the babies enough. We are technological beings. We invent trolleys so that we can both light and just push the babies who are far from us. Our babies sleep in other rooms far from the mother. We use technology to monitor them and watch them and hear them instead of having the babies with us. And then we raise them in extremely clean homes where we call dirt. That means filthy. So we avoid at maximum the exposure to soil, which might be necessary for that second phase of environmental development to recognize now non-self. So the first months of life is heavily human microbes. The second stage is very intense exploration of the non-self microbes. So C-section is about the first impacts that we can cause in a developing baby because it impairs the passage through the birth canal, and it also involves antibiotics. And C-section is associated, and there is plenty of epidemiological evidence, with type 1 diabetes, celiac disease, asthma, and obesity. These are the modern plagues, as my first slide showed. Some years ago, we did a study in the Amazon in Venezuela with my collaborators from the CAICET, Center for Amazonic Research. And we asked the question, what do the babies, the newborns, get? How different are babies born by C-section or vaginal? We have the vaginal delivering mothers and the C-sections here. Their mouth, skin, or vaginas depicted in colors according to different bacteria. For example, the red here is lactobacillus. The mothers didn't differ much, except for higher lactobacillus in the arms of the mothers who deliver vaginally. And that, we think, is contamination, healthy contamination when the mother breaks waters. That is a complete mess, as you may know. And even if you take a shower, these mothers took a shower before coming to the hospital, the lactobacillus is still in the very arms that will hold that baby. But the babies at the time of birth and in the meconium, which we had to wait a few hours for that, babies that were born vaginally resemble, and you can see that in the colors, their mom's vagina. Babies that were born by C-section, we were impressed to see that they were not sterile. They rapidly get bacteria that does not resemble the vagina. It resembles the skin. So this led me to be interested in the built environment, because we now know that those microbes come from the dust of the operating room, which have skin flakes, which come probably from the cleaning team, nurses, doctors, anybody but the mother. We have recently also shown in a study collaborating with Marty Blazer the effect of vaginal and the effect of C-section, mode of delivery, on the phylogenetic diversity of the developing baby from birth to 2 years of age. And we always saw how rapidly the two groups converge in terms of representation of bacterial populations in the gut and the succession that happens with maturation. But to our surprise, we can tell them apart after the 8th month. We can also tell them apart before, but not at the community level. There are marker populations that C-section babies lack for the entire first month. We are now doing the sequencing for the whole year. But just in the drop of diversity that comes after C-section, we can tell with very high certainty who was born vaginally or by C-section if we take a swab of the poop of a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. At 2 years, things seem to converge. We haven't gone farther than 2 years. C-section involves more than avoiding the natural seeding from mom's vagina, which is an interesting phenomenon because it's matrilineal. So we got our seeding microbes, our first pioneer colonizers from everywhere in the body from our mothers, and they got it from their mothers, and it's kind of a mitochondrial maternal lineage. C-section also involves, in this country at least, antibiotics because it's a surgery. Not all the countries use antibiotics in C-sections. And high probability of formula feeding. So it's a multi-impact. We have learned from field ecologists like Robert Payne that in aquatic environment, but there is also plenty of forest studies showing that if a normal ecosystem, mature ecosystem, is impacted, there is a property called resilience that bounces back the ecosystem to the original state. But if an ecosystem that has been impacted is re-impacted, then there are extinctions. The same, the same with an ecosystem that is not quite mature and is impacted. Extinctions follow. So the question comes naturally, well, are we urban people impacted? So urban people are the subject of study of the Human Microbiome Project launched by the NIH, and mostly developed industrialized countries that have the money to do the research are doing microbiomes on their people. The answer is provided in two of our studies. The first one, we collaborated with Jeff Gordon, a big guy in the field, and we show that in relation, these are phylogenetic diversity of the fecal bacteria in children and adults. The U.S. population have significantly lower phylogenetic diversity in the microbiome if we compare them with Malawi Africans or Amerindians that are semi-transculturated. These are Guahibo. Then, in collaboration with Oscar Noya from the Amazonic Center in Venezuela, they had access to first-time contact Amerindians with the Ministry of Health, and they got swabs for us. And their feces have substantially higher diversity. So the drop in diversity starts very early in the gradient of transculturation. By doing sequencing, we can see what is disappearing because we blast the bacteria, the taxa. So we know a Helicobacter is disappearing. We knew that, and that's very well documented. Some desulfovibrio, Oxalobacter, which protects us against getting oxalate kidney stones. Some other bacteria are, on the contrary, increasing. So the whole balance of our gut ecosystem is being changed by our lifestyle. So the consequences, and I hear a lot about diet and the dietary impact, but diet in a great measure, especially for newborns, is not only there to feed us, it's also there to feed our microbes. So particularly lactating kids, the milk, the human milk and any animal milk has a lot of products, compounds that are not digestible or absorbable by the host, but they are there to feed bacteria. So the consequences of changing our lifestyle to urban are multiple in the environment and in our microenvironment again. And again, we have the dilemma that is faced to these traditional communities of how to optimize the use of medicine to improve and not die of tuberculosis, malaria, and so on, without paying the very expensive price. For us, they also mean the reservoir of probably lost microbes that they still have. And I cannot tell how urgent this research on traditional people is before they integrate and also suffer those losses. Now I leave you with my colleague and friend Hortensia Caballero, an anthropologist who lives in Venezuela and studies the Yanomami Amerindian. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad and honored to be here. I really would like to thank the University of Minnesota, Healthy Food Institute, as well as the Shakopee and the Wakatonsiuk community. I'm really thankful for being here. And I probably should also say something in Yanomami, although it's not my native language, but kami ya puhito praro hetehe Minnesota hamaya hamamo hetehe ya puhito praro. I was saying that I was very happy to be here visiting you in Minnesota, and this is my first time in Minnesota. So to continue what Maria Gloria says, and I'm trying to basically make a relationship between biological and medical studies and anthropological studies. I'm going to present a case study of the indigenous peoples in the Venezuelan Amazon in order to try to understand all what Maria Gloria has said regarding the diversity of microbiome. So in this case, I would like to make a couple of questions that are how the life of indigenous peoples in the Amazon contribute to a more diverse microbiome, and what can we learn from Yanomami foodways and sustainable diets. Based on around 20 years of doing field research, anthropological field research among the Yanomami, especially on cultural change processes as well as education, interculturality, politics, health, and land tenure that have been mainly the focus of my research. I also have been very interested in trying to understand the ways of life of the Yanomami Indians in relationship to food and nutrition. So in order to do that, and social scientists we always, trying to find concepts that lead us to understand big processes. I consider that there are two interesting terms and concepts that we have to look in a really broad way. And the first one is food waste, and the second one is sustainable diets. Regarding food waste, it's an old term in social sciences. We have been using it a lot. And I use a quote from Jack Goody, a very famous anthropologist. It's a little bit old, the concept, however, is completely up to date. Jack Goody said that food waste is the modes of feeling, thinking, and behaving about food that are common to a cultural group. And if we, relate this very broad concept with the current concept of sustainable diet made by FAO, in which diets are those with low environmental impact, which contribute to food and nutrition security and to healthy life for present and future generations, and also address issues like protective of biodiversity, is culturally acceptable, economically affordable, nutritionally adequate, and is safe and healthy. I think that we can see interesting points and connections about these two concepts. So in terms of how to use these two concepts to try to understand Yanomami ways of life. Here, the Yanomami indigenous people, they live in the Venezuelan Amazon, and it has been considered in the anthropological literature for quite a lot. One of the few indigenous people that still are not so impacted by national society, less transculturation processes they have been experienced. Still, they have been engaged with national society in different ways. They also, right now, they participate in politics, and their leaders are frequently going to Puerto Ayacucho, that is the capital. But still, they are considered a traditional society in the Venezuelan Amazon as well as in Brazil. So right now, the Yanomami, one of the 41 indigenous peoples in the Venezuelan Amazon, it has around 15,000, and in Brazil around 20,000. And the area of occupancy is in the Amazon rainforest is pretty large. And as you can see, it's pretty much around 2 times the size of Portugal. So it's a very extensive area. But in this very extensive area, rainforest, there are 2 things that are very important in order to understand the way of life of indigenous people. One is the meaning and the irrelevance and the importance, the significance of their community that it calls Shapono, and that contains between 20 and 300 native people. In Venezuela, there are around 200 Shaponos, and this collective housing constitute the perimeter of their village. But it's not just only a matter of sites. It's a matter of ways of life. It's a matter of trying to understand the idea of being a Yanomami, of being an indigenous people. It's a matter of cosmology. It's a matter of being in family groups. It's a matter of how to get together in order to make relationship with other communities. And the other element is the rainforest. In Yanomami, it's called Urihi. And the Urihi is, of course, where they obtain the means for their subsistence. So the Urihi, the rainforest, and the community constitute both elements that cannot be understood separately. It's very important. There is no culture here, nature here. In anthropology, we have going beyond this division, this polarization about these two concepts. It's both. The Yanomami, they need the forest in order to have their ways of life, but they also need to have their community and create different aspect, material culture, as well as no material culture in their communities. So trying to focus and not trying to basically present the whole Yanomami culture, I'm going to concentrate basically in Yanomami subsistence activities. So in order to understand what Maria Gloria was explaining about this the microbiome diversity, is very important to understand the subsistence activities of rainforest people. So in the case of the Yanomami, they practice agriculture, they practice hunting, gathering, and fishing. But it's not just only how they practice their economic and subsistence activities. What we really trying to understand is how the Yanomami also think about food and also think about how to get the food from the forest. So for them, there are two ways of understand food and being hungry. One is yaohi, that means I am hungry in general, I'm hungry. And then the second one is yanaiki, that means I'm hungry of game or fish. And this very slightly difference make a whole complex of the idea how Yanomami really understand and try to get food and try to practice the different subsistence activities. So talking about a little bit about agriculture, there is a whole cycle. There is a whole way of trying to understand how they prepare in the garden, the hikarimo, in which the family participate them. The role of women and the role of men are very important. First, in the slash and burn, for example, men are in charge of that. But when they go and harvest, sometimes they go the family together. So here, what I wanted to present is all this cycle about talking about food waste, about thinking, behaving, getting together. It's a big cycle about how to get food, and I'm not going to say on the table, but probably I'm going to say on the leaf in this case. So here you can see some pictures about how they harvest and they get, for example, manioc and plantain that are part of the main subsistence diet, and especially how the family play a role, a very important role. It's not just like for us, like we can just go to the supermarket and buy some fruit and vegetables and then run to our homes and then go and run to our works. You know, they take their time, and this is a family experience in which most of them participate. So here I'll try to present some relevant issues about agriculture that it related to what is the techniques that they use, the crops, the cooking, and food. So here again, what you can see is all this idea of how the food waste, the Yanomami food waste, includes several elements, several aspects that goes from the process of slash and burn the gardens to the very end, that is the food that is roasted or boiled, and then you can see, for example, the crops that they have that is pretty much, for example, in this case, the carbohydrate, it's plantains and banana, manioc or cassava, papaya, taro, sweet potatoes in their diet. So in the case of hunting as well, there is a whole group of men that they go and hunt. So this is not something that they do individually. Sometimes could be, but mostly is a collective. Is a group of men that go depending of if they're going to have this food for the day or is going to be for a feast. So what they do, as you can see, is that they hunt several wild birds, for example. They also hunt monkeys, and you can see here, for example, the different kind of game that they hunt: tapir, armadillos, alligators, deer, rodents, and also the way how they cook, that is mostly roasted, smoked, or boiled, and then the protein. So you see, again, if we can go back to the slides before about when they say ya ohi or ya naiki, in this case, when they are really hungry about food that contains protein, they say ya naiki. That's why it's so relevant for them in this case. Fishing. Fishing is very important, and here the role of women is also relevant, as well as the rest of the family. You can see here pictures where women are in a lake during dry season, as well as you see the kids that they also participate in fishing. They have different techniques, and they also have different ways of cooking. As you can see also, it's not very clean. There's a lot of bacteria, but this is the good bacteria. And here, again, we can see the different techniques. They use fish hooks and nylon, nets, baskets, buoys, different kind of fish. There is a difference between the dry season and the wet season or rainy season, what they fish in these different two seasons, how they cook, and also fish is part of this idea of naiki, the protein, and it also is roasted, smoked, boiled, and a huge variety of fish, especially during dry season. Gathering is the fourth subsistence activity. It's also made by men, women, sometimes the family, the whole family. They can just go and collect palm fruit, honey, fat palm pith groups, as well regarding cooking and food, they boil and roast. So, if we try to connect what Dr. Maria Gloria has presented in the first part of this presentation, and with this second part of the presentation about the Yanomami Indians as a case of study, as an ethnographic case studies, and I show you, in a very brief way, different activities, subsistence activities, we see that this is a whole cycle that is related to indigenous people's ways of life, in this case, the Yanomami ways of life, that is related or is part about, of the whole food ways, the way how they think, how they behave, how they process the food, that is not just only the technical part, that is the whole cosmology, the whole vision that they have about food, but also is related to this sustainable diet. As you saw, they hunt, they gather, they fish, but if we follow the FAO standards, I mean, they have these standards, they follow these standards without knowing that they're following the FAO standards. And then we can have this diverse microbiome that, again, goes back to the indigenous ways of life. So this is a whole cycle that, trying to connect, and this was a very interesting experience, trying to work together from a biological and anthropological point of view, put together these two experiences. We found out that this is a whole cycle that started with indigenous ways of life and apparently ends with diverse microbiome, but now the diverse microbiome goes again to indigenous people's ways of life. So thank you. Oh, sorry. Here is the conclusion. Well, traditional cultures harbor a more diverse microbiome than in peoples living in industrialized society, and the challenge is the future use of sustainable diets and lifestyles that does not increase the risk of inflammatory and metabolic disease.